Fencing is arguably one of the oldest sports in the world. Its current form can be directly traced back to historical European dueling practices. It was one of the first sports to be included in the Olympics, which is probably the only time it really appears in the mainstream consciousness. I love this sport a lot. I've dedicated a lot of my life to it. It's brutal, it's beautifully complex, but as you may have guessed from the title of this video, it is fundamentally broken, built on very unstable foundations which could likely endanger its future. Now, maybe you've seen a bit of fencing before and have probably been a bit confused by it. Don't worry, stick around, I'm going to do my best to explain for everyone. In fencing there are 3 different weapons. With each weapon different equipment is used and there are different target areas and different rules. Each weapon is pretty much a different sport. The most simple to explain is épée. An épée has a button on the end that when compressed turns on a light indicating that a hit has been made. You can hit any part of the opponent's body from head to toe. If a fencer hits, they get a point. If both fencers hit within 40 milliseconds, then both fencers get a point. There are some other rules like stepping off a piste or other sorts of infringements, but that's pretty much all you need to know to understand what's going on in an épée bout. The simplicity of épée is probably what makes it the most popular weapon, and to be honest, the criticisms I make in this video don't apply quite so much to épée. The problems mostly exist in foil and in sabre. These are the weapons of convention. This means that they are governed by the rules of right of way or priority. The basic idea is that if you are under attack, you should first try and make the opponent's attack fail before you launch your own attack. If you attack into an already established attack, you will lose a point because the initial attack has priority. At a surface level that sounds straightforward enough, but there's a big issue, and that is what actually is an attack. Well, let's look at the rulebook. It gives us some pretty clear rules about how an attack should be properly executed. Things like beginning the extension of the arm before the lunge, or even the approximate angle between the blade and the arm. But if we look at this in practice, it is actually rare to see an actual attack performed as prescribed by the rulebook. Look at this example here. According to the rulebook, the attack is defined as the initial offensive action made by extending the arm and continuously threatening the opponent's target, preceding the launching of the lunge. The fencer on the right clearly begins extending his arm first, so by the rulebook you would assume that he's the one who gets the point. But no, the referee decides that it was the fencer on the left who initiated his attack first, and so gives him the point. You see, it turns out that no one actually follows the rules, even in cases where they should be pretty clear cut. For example, it pretty clearly states that hits made during or after a fall must be annulled, and yet top rated FIE referees awarded all of these hits without hesitation. In practice, what we have is kind of like a common law system. Instead of referees making decisions based off of, a codified rule book, instead we just kind of do our best to copy the kinds of decisions made by top FIE referees, kind of like, your top judges in a court system. So basically what this means is that refereeing is kind of vibes based. I'm sorry if I've not really given a particularly detailed explanation of the right of way rules. It's just something that is so fuzzy that it's kind of really hard to explain. Like, for years I've been trying to make some kind of video concisely explaining how this game actually works, and it's just so frustratingly inconsistent that it makes it really hard. And you can imagine, this is such a huge barrier of entry to the sport when it becomes really, really hard to give a concise explanation of the rules, and it really hurts the sport massively. Since refereeing is so vibes based, it is incredibly inconsistent. One referee may give an action one way, and another referee could interpret a near identical action very differently. Matters are further complicated by the fact that over the years, refereeing conventions evolve. So if you want to stay up to date, you kind of have to watch a lot of high-level fencing. If you miss a season or two, things can be kind of different when you come back to the sport. But the biggest issue with vibes-based refereeing is the enormous potential for cheating. If we just accept that referees don't need to objectively base their decisions off of the rulebook, and that refereeing is entirely subjective, then any given touch, referees are basically free to give the touch however they want. This inconsistency doesn't only apply to technical decisions, but to things like disciplinary matters also. This is what happened when an Uzbek fencer lost his temper after losing a bout at a Junior World Cup in Uzbekistan. And here is what happened when a Hong Kong fencer did a similar thing. The Hong Kong fencer received a black card, the Uzbek didn't even get a telling off. But fencing is supposed to be a gentleman's sport. Surely no fencer, coach or referee would attempt to exploit this inconsistency, surely? Okay, so the problem is with the rulebook. We just need to rewrite it, clear it up, update it, make it, work. Surely everything will be fine after that. Well, not really. You see, even if you have a super watertight rule system, you still need someone trustworthy enough to enforce it. Right now we have some very clear-cut rules that are just arbitrarily ignored. This isn't a problem with rules, the problem is with the people enforcing them. International fencing is run by the FIE. Alisher Usmanov has been the president of the FIE since 2008. Usmanov has been described by the European Union as one of Putin's favourite oligarchs. In 2022, he came under sanctions that caused him to suspend his presidency. He was recently re-elected president, only to immediately suspend himself again. The interim president, Emmanuel Katsiadakis, has claimed to be independent of Usmanov, but that doesn't stop him from heaping praise on him when he can. In 2024, allegations of referee corruption began to bubble over, culminating in this interview where a former FIE referee recounted being offered a bribe at an Olympic qualifying event.
How many, by percentage, would you say, referees right now are corrupted in saber fencing?
If you have, let's say you take the top 20 referees, about half.
That's a lot.
USA Fencing even wrote a letter to the FIE expressing concerns over certain referees and commissioned an independent report into the issue. Katsiadakis dismissed all concerns entirely and even claimed that fencing truly is the cleanest sport. Even if you ignore all the people who have voiced concerns about the integrity of the sport, there are some pretty concrete signs that the FIE do not take the integrity of their competitions very seriously. This is Vasil Milenchev of Bulgaria, one of the FIE's favourite referees. Milenchev is supposed to be refereeing the match on a piece behind between Poland and France. Instead, he spends the whole time coaching the Bulgarian team who are fencing on the opposite piste. This is explicitly not allowed and clearly unacceptable behaviour, but Milenchev faced zero consequences. This kind of thing is not unusual. The rules regarding conflict of interest between referees and affected parties are also frequently ignored without consequence, even at the Olympics. So if the FIE are so clean and transparent, why won't they enforce their own rules? The FIE itself isn't exactly built on robust foundations. It only really has two significant streams of income. Firstly from the International Olympic Committee and secondly from Usmanov's donations. Neither of these revenue streams are guaranteed to exist in the long term. Usmanov is obviously not going to live forever, and even in the short term he currently faces difficulties paying into the FIE as he used to due to the sanctions he faces. Fencing's place in the Olympics is not at all guaranteed. As it stands, fencing is clearly not the most spectator-friendly sport.
You've got no friends!
And as the IOC turns towards more popular sports like baseball and cricket, maybe at some point they'll have to decide to cull some of these less viewed events. The current IOC president has offered the sport some level of protection, since he himself was a fencer. But his term runs out very soon, and it's unlikely that the next IOC president will look on the sport quite so fondly. Usmanov may have invested a lot of money in fencing, but he hasn't done a whole lot to make the sport spectator friendly. And if you don't have an audience, you're going to have a hard time finding sponsorships and commercial partners. The funny thing is, decent national federations manage to find sponsors, yet right now it appears that the FIE don't really have any. You have to wonder why on earth would big brands like Nike not want to associate themselves with this guy. As it stands, the FIE is not self-sustainable in the long term, and it doesn't look like anyone is going to change that. In fact, I'm pretty sure that there are some people in the sport right now for whom an increase in attention would not be beneficial. Currently, fencing doesn't get a whole lot of media attention, and I don't think it would take much digging to uncover some pretty dirty secrets. The thing is, for all its faults, most of the time fencing still kind of works. Even if the actual rules are ignored, and even without any effective formal systems in place, a consensus on how things should be refereed is usually found. The vast majority of people in the sport want to compete fairly. Even the most suspect referees appear to be fair most of the time. The FIE is still able to put on some pretty impressive events, and I'm sure plenty of other small sports would love to be able to fill a 5,000 seat arena like this at this event in France. There are things to be positive about. The sport has become very safe due to robust equipment standards, and the sport has also spread out a lot from its traditional European heartland, with world-class fencers being produced on every continent. Fencing is an inherently interesting sport and will always have some appeal. There is also amazing work being done around the world to promote the sport at a grassroots level. There is so much potential in fencing, and it would be a shame to see all of this work go to waste. The thing is, it doesn't even have to be perfect. Football is probably the biggest sport in the world, and even there are some fairly major issues with stuff like refereeing and governance. But that doesn't mean that fencing can keep going on like this. Sports like Olympic boxing and weightlifting have faced similar problems, and we really don't want to follow in their steps. So yeah guys, that's the video. To be honest, I could talk about this for hours and hours. As always, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, and if you want to support the channel, head over to the Patreon. I've also recently launched the Slice of Sabre podcast. Occasionally I'll post the episodes on YouTube, but most of the episodes will be on Spotify, Amazon or Apple Podcasts. Thanks for watching. See ya. Bye.